Rain lashed against the cockpit glass like handfuls of gravel thrown by an angry giant. Inside the cramped cockpit of the AV-8B Harrier II, Captain Elias Thorne watched the raindrops race down the canopy, distorting the dim runway lights outside. The glowing green clock on his instrument panel read 3:14 a.m., a time when the rest of the world was fast asleep. But Elias was wide awake, his heart pounding a steady rhythm against his ribs as he ran through his pre-flight checklist. The smell of jet fuel and old leather filled his oxygen mask, a scent that usually calmed him, but not tonight. Tonight, the air was thick with tension because the call that had just come over the radio was not a drill. Before we begin, tell us in the comments where in the world you're watching from. The radio crackled to life, breaking the heavy silence of the storm. Rook, this is Tower. The voice of the air traffic controller sounded shaky, which was never a good sign. We have a recon team pinned down in the valley, Sector 4. They are surrounded by rising floodwaters, and opposing forces are closing in. They have no way out. Elias gripped the throttle, his knuckles turning white inside his flight gloves. He knew Sector 4 well. It was a jagged nightmare of steep cliffs and unpredictable winds, dangerous enough to fly through in daylight, let alone in a storm like this. "Copy, Tower," Elias replied, keeping his voice steady despite the knot forming in his stomach. "I am spooling up now. What is the status of the runway?" There was a long, heavy pause on the other end of the line. "That is the problem, Rook," the controller said. "The storm washed out the north end. You have less than half the runway to work with." Elias looked at the rain-slicked tarmac stretching out in front of him. For a normal fighter jet, taking off with a heavy fuel load on a shortened runway would be impossible, a mission doomed to fail before it even started. But the Harrier was not a normal jet. It was a jump jet, capable of pointing its engine nozzles down to push itself straight up into the air. However, doing a vertical takeoff with full fuel and equipment in this high wind was incredibly risky. "I'll make it work," Elias whispered to himself, flipping the switches to awaken the beast beneath him. The massive Pegasus engine whined to life, a high-pitched scream that vibrated to the metal seat and straight into his bones. He checked his nozzle angle lever, setting it carefully. He needed speed, and he needed lift, and he had to find the perfect balance between the two before he ran out of pavement. He pushed the throttle forward, and the jet lurched, eager to fly. The Harrier accelerated, rain streaming off the wings as the speed indicator climbed higher and higher. The end of the runway was rushing toward him terrifyingly fast, a wall of darkness where the pavement simply dropped off into the churning ocean. "Come on, old girl," Elias gritted out through his teeth. At the last possible second, he slammed the nozzle lever back. The exhaust vents rotated, blasting hot air toward the ground. The jet didn't just lift, it leaped. The sudden force pushed him deep into his seat, his vision graying out for a split second as gravity fought against the machine. The landing gear wheels cleared the edge of the runway by mere inches, kicking up a spray of ocean water as the Harrier clawed its way into the stormy sky. He was airborne, but the danger was far from over. The wind buffeted the small jet, tossing it around like a leaf in a gale. Elias fought the control stick, making constant, tiny adjustments to keep the plane level. He banked hard to the left, heading toward the mountains that loomed like black teeth in the distance. The clock now read 3:25 a.m. Rook, be advised. The radio crackled again. "Friendlies are taking fire from the ridge. They are running out of options." Elias narrowed his eyes, switching his view to the thermal camera. Through the gray and white screen, he could see the heat signatures of the battle below. It was a chaotic mess. He couldn't just drop a weapon. The bad guys were too close to the good guys. He had to get creative, and he had to do it fast. "I'm going in close," Elias announced, his voice calm. He slowed the jet down, transitioning from forward flight to a hover, a maneuver that defied the laws of physics for a fixed-wing aircraft. The Harrier hung in the air, defying gravity, suspended on a pillar of screaming hot air. He descended into the valley, the canyon walls dangerously close to his wingtips. The roar of his engine echoed off the wet rocks, amplifying the sound until it was deafening. This was his strategy. He tilted the nose down, using the sheer power of his jet wash to blast debris, water, and blinding heat toward the enemy position on the ridge. It wasn't a missile, But the psychological terror of a fighter jet hovering 50 feet above your head was enough to make anyone freeze. Suddenly, a warning light flashed red on his dashboard, bathing the cockpit in a sinister glow. Engine overheat. The computer voice warned calmly. Hovering consumed a massive amount of power, and the engine was swallowing too much hot air from its own exhaust. Elias ignored it for 5 more seconds, watching the enemy soldiers scatter in confusion, giving the trap team below just enough time to break cover and run for the extraction helicopter coming in low from the south. "Rook, we are moving. Get out of there," the team leader shouted over the radio. Elias slammed the throttle forward and rotated the nozzles back to flight mode. The jet surged, trying to climb out of the canyon, but then the engine sputtered. A loud bang shook the airframe. The engine had surged, choking on the turbulent air. The jet dropped 10 feet instantly. Elias's stomach dropped. He was falling toward the rocky canyon floor. He had one chance. He cut the power for a split second to clear the compressor stall, a move that felt insane because it meant falling faster. Then he slammed the throttle back to max. The engine caught with a roar of flames, biting into the air. The Harrier shot upward, clearing the canyon rim with only feet to spare. He leveled out, breathing hard, sweat stinging his eyes. "Team is clear, Rook." That was some cowboy flying, the voice on the radio said, sounding relieved. Elias let out a long breath. He didn't realize he had been holding. The flight back was quiet, the storm breaking just as the sun began to rise, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. He lined up for the landing, the gear locking into place. As the wheels touched the wet runway at 5:10 a.m., Elias patted the dashboard gently. It wasn't just a machine, it was a partner. They had made it back against the odds, bringing everyone home safe.